The sound of rolling suitcases mixed with the hurried breaths of passengers. A flight that should have been quiet was, within minutes, about to turn the first-class cabin of Skylux into a battlefield. Seat 2A. A wide leather chair, golden light reflecting off its edges like the glow of privilege. And in that very seat sat David Omari, a black man in his early 40s, tall, sharp, featured, his expression calm. In his hands was a tablet, his fingers moving slowly across the screen, as if the outside world had nothing to do with him. Then a woman appeared. Victoria Langford, 48, her blonde hair tied neatly in a bun, her diamond-studded watch tapping against the armrest like the ticking of entitlement. For her, every flight carried the same unspoken law. Seat 2A belonged to Victoria. No ticket needed, no paperwork required, only a commanding glance. And the messenger of that command was Melissa Harper, 32, a flight attendant with a strained smile, like a mask. She stepped forward, leaned slightly, her voice sweet yet tinged with arrogance. "Sir, this seat has been reserved for another Platinum VIP member. I'm afraid you'll need to move." The air seemed to freeze. A few passengers looked up, fingers pausing on their phones. For a moment, it seemed like a small mistake. But the measured breaths of Victoria and Melissa's icy stare made it clear this was something far more serious. David looked up, not angry, not argumentative, only steady. He slowly reached for his leather wallet, drew out a glossy black platinum card, held it up, his voice even and firm. "This is the seat printed on my ticket. I am also a platinum member." Melissa glanced at it quickly, her smile stiffening further. Then she turned to Victoria. Their eyes met, a silent pact exchanged. Power required no reason, only position. Victoria spoke, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "I always sit there. It is mine." The words cracked like an invisible slap. Passengers nearby began to murmur. A few phones tilted upward, cameras quietly aimed toward row 2. Tension tightened like a string about to snap. David paused for a few seconds, then extended his ticket once more. The letters were clear. 2A. He spoke, his voice low but resonant. "This is my seat, and I will remain here." At that moment, the cabin was no longer watching a dispute over seating. They were witnessing a battle between arrogance and composure, between privilege and dignity. Melissa cleared her throat, struggling to regain her professional tone, but her trembling voice betrayed her. "This seat is usually prioritized for our most loyal Platinum members, and Mrs. Langford has flown with us for many years." Loyalty. The word hung in the air, but everyone knew its true meaning. Not loyalty, but belonging. Victoria belonged. David did not. Victoria stepped closer, her luxury handbag brushing against her side, her lips curling into a victorious smile. "I have flown this route for years. Seat 2A is practically mine." Silence spread, broken only by the arrogant ticking of her diamond watch. David straightened, adjusted his tie. His gaze locked on Melissa's, his voice steel. "This seat was assigned to me. I will not move." In that instant, time seemed to rupture. Every eye in the cabin fixed on the three of them. A few fingers tapped record. Red lights flickered across the cabin. Victoria laughed bitterly, the sound deliberately loud. How ridiculous, arguing over a seat in first class. I have never seen anything so absurd. This time, the whispers no longer hid. Is she really trying to take his seat? But it's already on his ticket. This is clearly discrimination. Melissa tried to reclaim control. Sir, I must insist one last time. But David cut her off, his words short, sharp. No need to repeat. I will not move. His refusal was not loud, not angry. It was his calm, unshaken resolve that made the atmosphere grow heavier. In the warm glow of the cabin lights, 3 faces stood out. Victoria's pride, Melissa's unease, and David's stillness, solid as stone. Yet none of them knew that the man they dismissed as unworthy was in truth the owner of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. And within minutes, this aircraft cabin would no longer be a place of travel, but the stage for a storm unlike any they had ever seen. A single sigh. Then silence spread like oil across water. Passengers in the rows behind leaned forward, pretending to adjust their seatbelts, but their eyes locked on row 2. A few trembling hands lifted phones, lenses unsteady, the tiny red lights of record buttons blinking like 100 secret eyes. Melissa stood, rigid, her fingers gripping the edge of her service tray so tightly they turned white. In her ears thundered the sound of her own heartbeat. She knew well that every move, every word now was being captured, and within minutes it would escape this cabin and spread to the world. Yet behind her, Victoria's stare pressed like an unspoken order. Handle it. David remained motionless, both hands resting calmly on the armrests, his posture composed, unnervingly steady. No trace of tension, no drop of sweat, only eyes sharp as blades cutting through every false claim. Victoria, by contrast, pressed forward. She twisted her wrist, the diamonds on her watch flashing defiantly, the ticking sound carrying through the cabin. Shameful. You can't even give up a seat? Her laugh was thin, her voice not raised but loud enough to pierce every murmur. In a sudden shift, the cabin audience was no longer invisible. They became the jury. Every gaze, every camera became a suspended verdict. David slowly handed his ticket to Melissa once more. The words, Seat 2A, glowed clearly under the light. Tickets don't lie, he said, his voice low, each word falling like a hammer. Melissa swallowed hard. Her instinct screamed for her to stop, but the memory of Victoria's generous tips, her promises of long-term relationships, hissed in her ear. She inhaled deeply, regaining her flat professional tone, clinging to procedure. Sir, I will have to report this to my supervisor. She turned quickly toward the curtain separating the cabin. In that moment, first class fractured into 2 worlds. On one side, Victoria stood with arms crossed, her victorious smile bleeding arrogance. On the other, David sat silent, radiating a quiet authority that held every gaze captive. Whispers swelled like a hive shaken open. He has a valid ticket. This is clearly discrimination. It's being filmed. This clip is going online. Victoria glanced around, her smile unbroken. She was accustomed to attention. The more eyes upon her, the stronger her sense of triumph. Seconds later, The curtain stirred. Melissa returned, this time not alone. Beside her was Brian Keller, the cabin supervisor, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair cut sharp. He strode forward as though the plane's floor were his stage. His eyes locked onto David as though he were a criminal, not a paying passenger. "Sir, I need you to vacate this seat immediately," Brian announced, his voice deliberately loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. The passengers fell into silence. Phones were no longer discreet. Dozens of cameras were trained on the standoff. David looked up, closed his tablet, his voice deep and steady. "Reason?" Brian arched an eyebrow, pointing to Victoria. "This seat belongs to our VIP passenger." The words landed harsher than the slam of the aircraft door. David leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving Brian. He spoke slowly, each syllable striking the floor like a drumbeat. "This seat was assigned to me. I've shown my membership card. I've presented my ticket. I will not move." For a moment, Brian faltered. A crack appeared in his confident mask. He covered it quickly with a dry cough. Victoria pressed in, her voice pitched higher, performed for the whole cabin. "My God, we are here to fly, not to argue with someone who doesn't know his place. I have never been treated this poorly." Exasperated sighs spread, but not toward David. A few passengers shot sharp looks at Victoria, and the cameras kept rolling, capturing every word, every move. David lowered his tone, his eyes shining with resolve. "You can ask as many times as you like. My answer will not change. I will remain seated." The air felt drained from the cabin. An invisible struggle weighed heavy, the airline's authority clashing with the dignity of one passenger. None of them, not Victoria, not Brian, realized the truth. The calm man they had dismissed was no stranger who didn't know his place. He was David Amari, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar technology empire. A man who, with a single decision, could erase the future of Skylux Airways. And the fire had just been lit. The real storm was about to arrive. The noise in the cabin quieted, but not because the tension had eased. On the contrary, the silence felt like a held breath, waiting for an explosion. Melissa stood pressed against the wall, sweat beading at her temple. She knew she was under the gaze of dozens of eyes, followed by the lenses of dozens of phones. Then from behind, Victoria's gloved hand brushed against hers, a touch light as air, yet heavy as command. In an instant, Melissa saw a glimmer. Neatly folded bills slipped between slender fingers. Victoria leaned closer, her voice like a whisper, but pitched so nearby passengers would hear. "Thank you for handling this the right way." Melissa froze. Her heart pounded so hard, she feared others might hear it. Her trembling hand accepted the bills, quickly shoving them into her navy uniform pocket. The act lasted only seconds, but in first class, every second was magnified under the glow of lights and eyes. A muffled laugh came from the right hand row. A young passenger whispered to his friend, disbelief in his voice. She just took money. My God, they actually did that. 3 phones immediately angled forward. Their lenses captured it all. Victoria's hand withdrawing, Melissa's fingers still trembling. David saw everything. He said nothing. His eyes, calm as a midnight lake, reflected the image of the bills vanishing into a pocket. Inside him stirred a familiar feeling, one that had shadowed him since childhood. Injustice cloaked in civility. Yet instead of anger, he drew one measured breath, holding on to calm, holding on to dignity. Brian Keller, the cabin supervisor, seemed to draw strength from the sight. He cleared his throat, his voice booming like a judgment. "Sir, if you refuse to comply, we will be forced to call security. This is your final chance." Phones vibrated softly. Passengers leaned forward, nearly forgetting to breathe. Everyone understood now. This had gone far beyond a seat. This was the naked truth, prejudice laid bare. David opened his eyes, lifted his head, his voice deep and resolute. "You've seen the ticket. You've seen the membership card. I am not moving." The words sliced through the pretense like a blade. A man in row 3 blurted out, "He's right. This is blatant discrimination." Victoria rolled her eyes, her bitter laugh loud and theatrical, straining to drown out the crowd. "For heaven's sake, we cannot waste time on this stubborn man. I have an important meeting right after landing." Melissa's hand tightened over her pocket, feeling the bills burning against her skin. She knew everyone had seen. She knew the cameras had captured it. But the fear of being cut off from Victoria's tips, from her favor, chained her in silence. Brian stepped closer, his shadow looming over seat 2A. "We will call the captain. If you persist, security will handle it." The words struck like the final knock before the bell tolled. David locked eyes with Brian, then quietly set his hand on the closed tablet resting on his lap. He did not tremble, did not flinch. He gave only one short answer, hard as steel. "Do what you must. I will not move." The first-class cabin held its breath. In the stillness, the sounds were deafening. The ticking of Victoria's diamond watch, Melissa's ragged breathing, and the smallest, most dangerous sound of all, the clicks of dozens of cameras, immortalizing every word, every movement. In just a few minutes, this would no longer be contained within the cabin. It would pour out into the world, a rising storm, ready to engulf an entire airline. The curtain of the cabin rustled. Heavy footsteps echoed in the suffocating space. Then Captain Robert Hayes appeared, a 52-year-old man with broad shoulders, his uniform pressed crisp as though forged from steel. His stern face was one that usually reassured passengers, but today it only deepened the sense of unease. Walking beside him were Brian Keller and Melissa Harper. They stood in a line, forming a wall closing in on David. "Sir," Hayes's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "The crew has full authority to reassign seats. I am ordering you to vacate this seat immediately." A wave of murmurs rose like surf. Passengers leaned forward, phones lifted higher, the red glow of recording lights scattered across the cabin like cold stars. David raised his head, meeting the captain's eyes directly. No avoidance, no fear. He spoke slowly, each word cutting into the silence like a blade. "My ticket clearly states Seat 2A. I am a platinum member. I have violated no rules, no Therefore, I will not move." The cabin froze. Melissa swallowed hard. Brian clenched his jaw. Victoria smiled triumphantly, certain victory was hers. Hayes tightened his grip on his cap, leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping lower, colder. "This is your final warning. If you refuse, I will call security. You will be escorted off this aircraft." A collective gasp broke from the passengers. A woman whispered, "He has a ticket. Why are they forcing him off?" David drew a deep breath, leaned back in his seat, his hands resting neatly on his thighs. He answered briefly, like nails driven into wood. "I'm not going anywhere." The air shattered. Some passengers could not contain themselves, their voices rising in protest. "This is unfair. We are recording everything." Victoria turned, lifting her champagne to her lips, serene as if watching a play. "Absurd," she murmured, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Hayes gave a slight nod. Brian understood. He strode forward, pulled back the curtain, and signaled. Then the curtain ripped open. 2 uniformed men entered, Officer Daniel Brooks and Officer Miguel Torres. Their eyes were cold, their steps heavy, the snap of black gloves echoing sharply. The silence in the cabin thickened until one could hear the pounding of hearts. Brooks stopped in front of seat 2A. His voice was low but firm. "Sir, we have been called to escort you off this flight. Please stand." David turned his gaze on him, his voice steady, almost unnervingly calm. "For what reason? What law have I broken?" Torres glanced quickly at Brian, then dropped his eyes to avoid David's. Brooks kept his tone steady. "You are accused of refusing to comply with the crew's instructions." David's lips curled slightly. It was not defiance, but the faint smile of a man long familiar with injustice. "Failure to comply with an unlawful order is not a crime. I am only sitting in the seat I purchased." Gasps erupted around the cabin. A man raised his phone higher, shouting, "He's right! You're recording discrimination right now." Victoria rolled her eyes, her tone sharp and bitter. "My God, we cannot fly if he refuses to move. Take him off." Melissa shrank back, her hand brushing the pocket where Victoria's money burned against her conscience. David folded his tablet, slid it into his leather bag, and stood. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. His shoulders squared, his head high. Every gesture radiated a chilling composure. The 2 officers flanked him, walking like moving walls. David's shoes tapped in steady rhythm against the cabin floor as he walked. Behind him, whispers spread like wildfire. "They're really forcing him off? We're witnessing history. Skylux will pay for this." Victoria slid into seat 2A, like a queen returning to her throne. The champagne in her glass shimmered gold as she tilted it. She smirked. Finally, peace. But she did not know that peace would last only a few breaths. Because the moment the cabin door closed behind David Omari, a true storm had begun. A storm powerful enough to drown Skylux Airways. The cabin door closed behind David Omari. Outside, the light from the terminal spilled across his face, not the light of humiliation, but the light of truth awakened. They thought they had just expelled a stubborn passenger. But in silence, David pulled out his phone, opened the keyboard, and sent a simple message to his COO, Emily Carter. They chose the wrong man. To understand the weight of those words, we must go back more than 30 years, to a run-down apartment in South Chicago. David Omari, the son of a steel worker and a mother who cleaned offices on night shifts, grew up surrounded by the sound of train whistles and the smell of smoke clinging to every shirt. His father, Kwame Omari, hands hardened with calluses after 12-hour shifts, still made time to teach his son one lesson. You must learn to stand tall, even when the world tries to force you to bow. David understood that lesson on the fateful night when he was 16. The phone rang shrill in their cramped apartment. His mother collapsed to the floor. His father, the man who held the family together, had been killed in a violent robbery on his way home from work. That night, standing over the hastily filled grave, his mother's trembling hand in his, David swore, "I will build something that forces the world to see us as human beings first." No basketball, no street corners. David found his escape in an old computer discarded in the basement of a church. The screen flickered, the keyboard jammed, but for an 11-year-old boy, it was a portal to another world. While other kids played video games, David dismantled every screw, studying every line of code from borrowed library books. By his teenage years, he was writing small programs that could predict game outcomes, uncovering patterns in chaos. The ability to see hidden order in disorder became David's lifelong skill. The path, however, was not smooth. He worked odd jobs, waiting tables, night shifts in warehouses, repairing computers for cash, just to scrape together tuition. Every time he met investors, their eyes slid over his skin, his foreign name, then settled with doubt. Countless rejections, countless times his ideas were dismissed. But David remembered his father's words. Stand tall. At last, in a cramped room with only a makeshift desk made of wooden crates and an old laptop, Omari Technologies was born. A small company with a mission larger than itself, to create systems that forced businesses to treat customers fairly, regardless of name, skin color, or accent. Slowly, the technology spread. Fortune 500 companies, governments, banks, all came to him. David did not just build a company, he built a mirror for those who had once been unseen. After 2 decades, Omari Technologies had grown into a $2.8 billion empire. And in a cruel twist, Skylux Airways, the airline that had just thrown him out of seat 2A, was in urgent negotiations to sign a $4.2 billion contract with his company. Their entire survival depended on David Omari's signature. Yet the passengers, Melissa, Brian, Victoria, none of them knew. They saw only a black man, ordinary in their eyes, sitting in a seat they thought he did not deserve. Their mistake was not just insulting a man. They had humiliated the only potential savior of their airline. Standing outside the aircraft door, David slid his phone back into his pocket. His eyes burned with fire. He was no longer the 16-year-old boy trembling at his father's grave, but a man who had tasted contempt and forged it into a weapon. They thought they had cast out a passenger. In truth, they had awakened the storm that would soon drown their empire. Just minutes after David Omari stepped out of the cabin, the world began to erupt. A single click in first class had multiplied into hundreds of clips, short videos, barely a minute long, but enough to capture everything. Victoria slipping money into Melissa's pocket, Brian's harsh command, Captain Hayes' cold smile, and David rising to his feet with his back straight, head held high, escorted away from seat 2A. Those clips, like sparks from flint, ignited the dry grass of social media. The hashtag seat 2A flooded Twitter. Flying, while black shot to the top of trending in just 1 hour. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all exploded. Each video spread like a tidal wave, washing away every effort to cover it up. In the VIP lounge of the airport, David sat in silence. His phone vibrated endlessly, hundreds of notifications every minute. Strangers sent him clips, journalists sent urgent emails, civil rights groups tagged his name in their posts. "You are not alone." We saw it. "Thank you for standing tall," Emily Carter called, her voice urgent, rapid. "The video is global. Legal is ready. PR is preparing the statement. All we need is your nod." David answered quietly, his voice steady. "Do it." Meanwhile, at Skylux Airways headquarters, chaos reigned. On the big screen, the Twitter feed updated every second, thousands of furious comments pouring in. A young PR staffer reported, his hands shaking. "The video has over 10 million views in 2 hours. International press is running it. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. They all have Skylux accused of racial discrimination in their headlines." The CFO barked, voice hoarse. "The stock is in free fall. 6% in 1 morning. If this continues, investors will flee." The PR director clutched his head, his face pale. "We need to release a statement immediately. Talk about diversity. Training. An internal investigation." A harsher voice cut him off. "It won't work. The video is undeniable. People saw the money. They saw the discrimination. This isn't spin. This is guilt made visible." The boardroom fell into suffocating silence. Everyone could hear their own heartbeat. Then a message flashed on the central screen. David Omari, CEO of Omari Technologies, was the passenger removed from seat 2A. 1 second later, the room exploded. "What?" "He's the one we're negotiating the $4.2 billion deal with." God, we've destroyed ourselves. The head of the executive board, his face ashen, delivered the verdict in a chilling tone. "This isn't just this is an existential crisis." Outside, the outrage grew fiercer. Civil rights leaders called for boycotts of Skylux. Partner brands issued statements saying they were reconsidering relationships. Slow motion clips of Victoria handing over money, Brian's words, "worthy customers," and David's calm declaration, "I will not move," became symbols of a movement. People wrote, "He could buy the airline, yet he was still treated as an outsider. If even a billionaire is not safe, what about the rest of us?" Every word, every image struck like a hammer blow against the walls of Skylux. David sat in silence in the lounge, the glow of his phone screen reflecting on his composed face. He remembered his father, the calloused hands, the gentle smile after exhausting shifts. He remembered the promise at the grave, to force the world to see dignity first. Now, he did not need to shout. The truth had millions of amplifiers. David tightened his grip on the phone, and he knew, from this social media storm, he would forge the hammer that would strike down the empire that dared trample on his dignity. The storm had begun, and Skylux had no escape. In the small conference room of Omari Technologies, the glow of countless screens covered the walls. On them, videos, articles, and endless hashtags scrolled without pause. Seat 2A, #flying, while black, #justice for Omari. David sat at the head of the table, steady as a statue cast in bronze. Beside him, COO Emily Carter updated the flood of news, while teams of lawyers and PR staff buried themselves in laptops. No one spoke. The air was so thick that the sound of keystrokes felt like war drums. At last, Emily looked up. "David, the public is waiting for your response. We can release a statement at any moment." David drew in a long breath. The image of his father returned, the man who fell victim to a robbery and left him with one lesson: stand tall, even when they try to force you down. He raised his head, his voice deep and unwavering. "Not just a response. Today we finish this." Outside, Skylux was sinking into chaos. The board of directors convened in emergency. The CFO screamed into the phone, "Stock has dropped 12% this morning. If we don't stop this, we collapse." PR scrambled frantically, drafting statements. "We'll call it an isolated incident. Say we value diversity." But a board member slammed the table. "Are you insane? This isn't an incident. This is the CEO of the company we begged to save us. $4.2 billion. Our future rests on him. And now he sees us as his enemy." No one answered. In the suffocating boardroom, the only sound was the relentless beeping of stock numbers bleeding red like spilled blood. Then it happened. A new post appeared. A 90-second video released from David Omari's official account. On screen, he sat upright before the camera. A plain backdrop, no special lighting, only a calm face, a steady voice, every word striking like a hammer against hot steel. "I was forced to leave seat 2A, the seat I purchased, with a platinum membership card. I followed every rule. Yet they told me I did not belong. Let me be clear. Dignity is not for sale. Not mine. Not anyone's." Omari Technologies is officially ending negotiations with Skylux Airways. The $4.2 billion contract is no longer on the table. And today, we will be filing a lawsuit against Skylux for discrimination. He paused, his eyes locking onto the lens. This is not just my story. This is the story of everyone who has ever been told they are not worthy. I will not allow silence to protect injustice for one more second. The video ended. Within 15 minutes, it reached 1 million views. International news networks replayed it non-stop. Reporters all used the same phrase: the $4.2 billion bombshell. At Skylux, the board sat frozen. A member whispered, "He just fired the kill shot." An in-house lawyer rushed to suggest, "We need to reach out, beg to renegotiate, promise reforms." But the CEO of Skylux, his face grey as ash, only shook his head. It's too late. His mind is made. Outside, the outrage swelled into a tidal wave. Shareholder groups, loyal customers, even pilots from rival airlines voiced their support for David. A new hashtag surged across platforms, hacked ground Skylux. The footage of Melissa pocketing a bribe, Brian's shouting, Captain Hayes's threats, played again and again on every channel. And David's words, "Dignity is not for sale," became a rallying cry, printed across thousands of posts. In the war room of Omari Technologies, Emily smiled faintly, her eyes meeting David's. "Do you know what you just did? You turned humiliation into your sharpest weapon." David stayed silent, his eyes burning with resolve. He did not laugh. He did not gloat. Only one low sentence cut through the air like a blade. They thought they took a seat. In truth, I just took their future. Skylux Airways headquarters, 27th floor, boardroom. The projector's light swept across the faces of 3 people seated in the chairs of the accused: Melissa Harper, Brian Keller, and Captain Robert Hayes. In front of them, a massive screen replayed the infamous video over and over. Victoria slipping money into Melissa's hand, Melissa pocketing it, Brian issuing threats, Hayes declaring, "This is your final warning." Each replay flashed like a blade cutting into flesh. A board member's voice was cold. "Play it again." Victoria's whisper echoed from the speakers. "Thank you for handling this the right way." Then the image of Melissa sliding the bills into her pocket. The room was silent except for the frantic pounding of 3 guilty hearts. Melissa kept her head down, fingers twisted together, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to. She was a frequent flyer. I didn't want to cause trouble," an HR director snapped. "Didn't want to cause trouble? The whole world just saw you take a bribe on an aircraft. That single act didn't just shame Skylux, it incinerated our entire reputation." Melissa broke down in tears, but her sobs were drowned out by the cutting tone of the company's lawyer. "We have no choice but to terminate your contract, effective immediately." The video shifted. Brian Keller leaned into David's face, voice dripping with disdain. "This is your final chance. If you refuse, we will call security." The words reverberated across the boardroom like a verdict. Brian tried to steady his voice. "He refused to cooperate. I followed procedure to keep the flight on time." A female executive slammed the table, cutting him off. "What procedure allows you to call a paying passenger unworthy? What procedure allows you to ignore a clearly printed ticket? You didn't manage the situation. You created it." Brian faltered. He knew the clip had already spoken louder than any defense. When the board declared, "You are suspended immediately, pending official termination," Brian bowed his head, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of the world. Finally, the light turned to Captain Hayes. The screen replayed him stepping out, voice clipped and firm. "This is your final warning. If you don't move, we will call security." Hayes tried to muster pride. "I had to protect my crew. In the cockpit, unity is paramount. If I contradicted them, we would lose discipline." A voice cut him off, cold as ice. "And that blind unity cost us $4.2 billion. You didn't protect your crew. You drove this airline into the abyss." Hayes froze, his aging eyes hollow. He knew his decades, long career, had just turned to ashes. "Captain Hayes, you are permanently terminated. There is no place for you in aviation again." But the final blow did not fall on the 3 before the board. It landed on Victoria Langford. Her name blazed across the screen. Online headlines screamed, "Langford caught bribing on aircraft." Cosmetics brand severs ties with Victoria Langford. Customers boycott. Langford office phones ring non-stop. The image of her sitting in seat 2A, champagne raised in mocking laughter, was enlarged into a symbol of privilege and arrogance. A board member stared at the screen, his tone bitter. She didn't work for Skylux, but she'd dragged us straight to hell. No one argued. The truth was undeniable. Skylux was bleeding out because of Victoria Langford. The meeting ended. The statement terminating Melissa, Brian, and Hayes was drafted that very night. Skylux promised comprehensive reforms, new training programs, an end to bias. But outside, the public no longer believed. Headlines declared, Skylux doesn't act out of conscience, but out of fear. And it was true. Fear gripped the entire company. Fear of losing customers, fear of losing shareholders, fear of losing everything. Meanwhile, David Omari sat in his glass-walled office, quietly watching the news unfold. He did not gloat. He did not smile in victory. He simply spoke, his voice steady and low. They think they closed a door. In truth, they have opened a courtroom for the entire world. News of Skylux firing Melissa Harper, Brian Keller, and Captain Robert Hayes quickly flooded the headlines. But the public did not applaud. They did not see it as victory. They called it the price of fearing public outrage. Skylux stock continued to plummet. Partners cancelled contracts. Victoria Langford, once so confident in seat 2A with a glass of champagne in hand, was now cut off by major brands and fiercely boycotted by the public. From a symbol of luxury, she had become a living example of privilege exposed. Yet while Skylux struggled to survive, David Omari chose another path. One morning, in the middle of the media storm, he stepped up to a podium at an international press conference. No dazzling stage lights, no dramatic music. Just a simple microphone and his composed face. The hall was silent. Dozens of cameras locked onto him. David began. They thought they stripped me of my dignity when they forced me from seat 2A. But dignity was never theirs to take. The audience stirred. Many had already heard him say these words in the viral video, but spoken live, with his deep, steady voice and fire in his eyes, they became a declaration. He paused, then continued. The compensation Skylux will be forced to pay. I will not use it to enrich myself. I will use it to build a legacy. Today, I announce the Omari Aviation Equity Fund. Behind him, the screen lit up, revealing the logo. Silver wings rising from an empty chair, the symbol of the seat once taken from him, now transformed into a seat for the next generation. This fund, David continued, will provide scholarships for young people from minority communities, helping them become pilots, flight attendants, aerospace engineers, and air traffic controllers. Future generations will no longer be told they do not belong in the skies. Applause thundered through the hall, powerful and unending. Some journalists put down their pens and clapped along. Among the audience, young students sat with eyes glistening, whispering to one another, "We'll have a chance." Because of him. Instantly, the news spread worldwide. CNN ran the headline, "David Omari turns humiliation into opportunity." BBC declared, "A seat taken away becomes thousands of seats for generations to come." A new hashtag surged. #WingsOffDignity. Social media filled with videos from families thanking him. A mother filmed her young son wearing a paper pilot's outfit, saluting. "I want to fly a plane. Thank you, Mr. Omari." A group of black students gathered at their local airport, holding banners that read, "We belong in the skies." In the headquarters of Omari Technologies, Emily Carter approached with a thick report. In just 48 hours, the fund has received millions in voluntary donations. Universities and international airlines are reaching out to partner. You've started a movement, David. This is more than just a fund. David gazed out through the glass window, the skyline washed with morning light. He did not smile, did not boast. He simply nodded and whispered, "Father, I have kept my promise." In his eyes, the image of his father appeared, calloused hands and a gentle smile behind the haze of factory smoke. And now, from the ashes of injustice, the flame of justice had been lit for an entire generation. That night, the lights blazed across the hall of the Global Conference on Ethics and Technology in Geneva. More than 3,000 people filled the room, from young tech founders to world leaders. All were waiting for the man who, just days earlier, had been escorted from an airplane seat, now the focus of the entire world. The MC's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Omari." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Hundreds of cameras followed his every step, yet David did not stride like a conquering king. He walked slowly, upright, his expression composed. Each step echoed in the hearts of the audience, drawing them into silence. He stopped at the podium. No grand gestures, no pounding music, only his voice, deep and steady, reaching into the depths of every soul in the room. 2 days ago, I was asked to leave the seat I had purchased, seat 2A. I presented my ticket. I showed my membership card. I followed every rule, but they told me I did not belong there. The room fell still. 1,000 people silent. Only that voice, steady, striking like a hammer against the stone walls of prejudice. But here is the truth. Dignity cannot be stripped away. It cannot be bought. It cannot be surrendered to anyone. They could pull me from a chair, but no one could ever pull me from my own dignity. A murmur spread through the crowd. Eyes glistened. Some placed hands over their chests, as if to steady the beating of their own hearts. David lowered his voice, speaking slowly. This story is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they were not enough. To the worker dismissed, to the child mocked, to the employee overlooked for the color of their skin or the sound of their voice. It belongs to all of us. He paused, then stepped forward, the light catching the fire in his eyes. Power means nothing if it protects only the powerful. Influence holds no value if it amplifies only those already privileged. And dignity is the one thing that never changes. It is not for sale. It is not for negotiation. The hall trembled. Some rose to their feet, clapping loudly. But David raised his hand, and the applause subsided. He wanted silence, for in silence his words would carve themselves deeper. I founded Omari Technologies to eliminate bias in customer service, but no algorithm can erase prejudice if we refuse to face it. Technology is only a tool. True change must come from us. His tone sharpened, steel in his voice. They thought they silenced me, but in truth, they handed me a microphone, and today I use it not just for myself, but for all those who have never been heard. His final words thundered across the hall, weighty and unforgettable. They thought they took my dignity, but dignity was never theirs to take. In that moment, the hall erupted. Applause roared like thunder, shaking the ceiling. Many wept openly. Journalists rushed to transmit every word, knowing they were witnessing history. On social media, within minutes, a new hashtag was born. #dignity unbroken. It spread like wildfire. David stood there, not smiling with pride, not raising his arms in triumph. He simply bowed his head slightly, a gesture to all who had ever been forced to bow under injustice, because now he knew they would rise and stand tall. In this world, power can buy a first-class ticket. It can buy an airline. It can even buy silence. But there is one thing it can never buy: the dignity of a human being. And the story of David Omari reminds us. Dignity belongs to no one else but ourselves, and no one has the right to take it away. If you believe that respect must be the starting point of every flight, every encounter, and every relationship, hit like to help spread this message. And don't forget to subscribe so you can continue to follow stories of justice and resilience.